Okay, so we're on lesson number 313. Um, now, let a new perception come to me. And the emphasis on the immediacy and the availability of the experience that we're able to have is always now. It's never past because the past is gone, and it's never future because the future never gets here, and the future in that sense will be exactly as the past is, unless you allow for a new perception to occur within your heart and your mind now. Father, there is a vision which beholds all things as sinless, so that fear has gone, and where it was is love invited in. When I woke up first thing this morning, I checked my phone to see if there was any messages, and there was something. Somebody had placed something on Facebook, and I've been looking for it since I decided to do the commentary on this lesson, because I wish I could say exactly, I wish I could repeat the words of the meme exactly as they were, but they were referring to the greatest conspiracy that actually has ever taken place in the history of man and mankind is the conspiracy that we have no spiritual eye, we have no third eye. The conspiracy that allows us to continue to utilize the body's eyes rather than come into the acceptance and reawakening and reopening of our spiritual eye was listed as the number one conspiracy to have been perpetrated on the human race. Now, what's interesting about it when I read it was my immediate response was to wonder who the they were other than us who perpetrated that rumor and perpetuated that conspiracy. But it's interesting because in one sense it is true. And that's what Jesus addresses in the early part of the Course. The idea that no correction, therefore no new perception, is possible, even now, without the willingness to accept the fact that you have a spiritual eye, accept the fact that that spiritual eye was closed by your decision, and decide once again that the closing of that spiritual eye to light was not the brightest idea we ever had. And in fact, we're going to decide now to do whatever it takes to allow that spiritual light open. Now, when we talk about now let a new perception isn't just reconceptualized and spiritualized adjustment of the old concepts you're using. A new perception comes from release from, let's call it, the basis from which you were perceiving in its entirety, and allowing that basis to be on a fundamentally new and different total understanding, and the understanding that we are asking to have the experience of in this lesson right here and right now is the experience of our own sinlessness and the sinlessness of our brothers in the shared identity that we are. Rather than thinking we're bodies in space and time, we're coming into an experience of recognizing that we are the living Son that God created perfectly. And when we begin to see, not from conceptual reassociation of that idea within our mind, but from the experience that comes from the existential reality of the sinlessness of the self that God created us to be, glimpsed within the formulation that we experience ourselves as now. And then we allow that glimpse to become more and more generalized as we, in a sense, utilize the opening of the spiritual eye to the truth of our sinlessness, and then allow it to be how we view based on the visions that come to us from that shared identity of Christ to inform our thinking, even as we seem to be men and women in space and time. Father, there is a vision which beholds all things as sinless, so that fear has gone. Of course, when fear and guilt are gone, and we recognize that we share a single reality that is sinless. In other words, it is without lack, without the missing of the truth of its identity as God created it in his mind and heart to share the totality of reality. When we behold, there is a vision which beholds all things as sinless. That would be the vision we would allow ourselves to have when in the reopening of our spiritual eye, we begin to utilize what is glimpsed and understood there, rather than relying on any type of logical thinking that the ego would foster, so that fear is gone. And where it was, love is invited in. And love will come wherever it is asked. This vision is your gift. I always like to remind people of the back door or the reverse of these lessons, so that you can begin to deal with yourself in an honest and integral way. Okay? Let me say it this way. Let's put it this way. If I were to use this sentence, and love will come wherever it is asked. Okay? How would I say this? The recognition that you have asked truly is the experience of love being given to you. If an experience of love does not come subsequently and simultaneous to your asking, then your asking was not true and was not honest. Now, I'm not saying that in a way or for the purpose of judging yourself or judging your brother. I'm mentioning it as a way, in fact, that our hearts and our minds work, because we must get the result of our thinking. But the thoughts that we're thinking up here are not our true thoughts. The thoughts that we think are the thoughts that control the perception that we get from what we're projecting, are the unconscious ones that we only have access to by accepting the fact that we're projecting them and utilizing them to heal our mind, okay? When finally our heart and our mind come together in an unequivocal instant of asking, the answer is simultaneous to the asking and occurs because of your own ability to be true to yourself and true to the Holy Spirit by the unequivocation of your mind for a single outcome. Okay? That means you usually get to a point where there's nowhere left for you to go in your own mind. And instead of implementing all those instead of implementing and manipulating the world through the implementation of our twisted ideas, instead of doing that, what we do is not do that for a long enough second so that we open our mind or remain open rather than close it to the advent of the Holy Spirit's appearance in the gap that we left open. Okay? Now, that's where vision comes in. That's where we begin to let the light in and thereby have experiences that show us we were true to the asking because we had experiences that were true in relationship to the release of the concepts that form the problem and the opening to the light and love of the Holy Spirit, which generally speaking, I says, just that's not true. The ideas that you're holding about yourself and about your brothers, about the world, are not true. And it's not that you could have true ideas. It's that all of your ideas become false, and a true idea, or as this says, a new perception comes to me. And now there's a new basis in its entirety for seeing. The eyes of Christ look on a world forgiven. In his sight are all its sins forgiven, for he sees no sin in anything he looks upon. Now, don't make the mistake of thinking, how would I say this? You're going to see, what you see with your eyes may not be any different than what you previously saw with your eyes. However, the state of mind, for an instant, let's use that word, the state of mind that you look out of does not allow the ego to formulate the judgments, opinions, and preferences that you would have previously put upon the scenes you're seeing. Because the vision of innocence lights up and informs what you're seeing. Of its own reality, and it takes on, when it comes back to you, that, how would I say it, that experience. You're looking out from a forgiven mind on that which previously you thought of as sinful, and because the sin is removed from your mind, the sin and the judgment and sin is likewise removed from how you were seeing, so you see everything in a new perception that's free from the guilt and the fear of the old. Right where you previously were seeing fear, guilt, and the condition of sickness, pain, suffering, and death. Now let his true perception come to me, that I may waken from the dream of guilt and look within upon my sinlessness, which you have kept completely undefiled upon the altar to your Holy Son, the self with which I would identify. Now, when we identify with that self, we see as that self sees. When we identify with the ego, we see as the ego would have us see. Because the self that God created us to be, and which we truly are, is whole, perfect, innocent, and eternal. When we begin to look at that, we begin to see the true nature of everything as it is in reality, rather than the false perceptions the ego would foster in order to continue the state of fear and guilt that it necessitates for its own survival. Let us today behold each other in the sight of Christ. How beautiful we are, how holy and how loving. Brother, come and join with me today. We save the world when we are joined. Yes, We save the world when we are joined, because the only problem there has ever been is the idea that we're separate from everything. And when we join with the brother who has already recognized his own whole perfect nature as the everythingness of creation, we join with that which has already fulfilled its function, recognize within ourselves everything that we share with our brother as the Christ, and reclaim the strength, wisdom, and understanding that we can utilize as motivation to fulfill our function, with the recognition that the strength doesn't come from anything in the world of space and time. So therefore, there's nothing in space and time that can actually stop you from fulfilling your function. And that's how we save the world. Not necessarily by doing, but by the act of allowing our mind to change, and then miraculous doings that stem from that allow our brothers to recognize the truth of who they are in instantaneous moments of joining with us, so that the idea of separation and all it breeds simply ceases to seem to be true in our mind, and we no longer have to deal with the vibratory irregularities that come from the dissonance of thinking that what the ego was showing us was something that we needed to resist, defend against, pursue, acquire, or do anything at all with. So now, right here, right now, right there, right here, right now, right there, we're going to let a new perception come to me and come to you. And in that shared whole new perception of the innocence of our own true reality and the nature of the self that God created us to share with Him and with each other, we will look out and see a world that's bright with the glow of the light that we've allowed to enter back into our conscious awareness, because we finally decided to end the conspiracy of this closed third eye and the false nature of thinking that the form in our physical body has something to do with who we are and the laws we need to follow.